This episode is brought to you by Content Multiplied. It's not a secret anymore that content creation is really important, but very few people talk about the importance of consistency. And I myself have really struggled with that consistency. And for that reason, I looked for a solution, and Content Multiplied was a really good one for me. Since using them, I've been able to focus on what I enjoy the most, which is recording podcasts, while Myla and her team are really taking care of everything else. Whether you have a podcast, you're holding keynote speeches, you're doing a YouTube series, you're writing a blog, a newsletter, a book, the Content Multiplied team can really take whatever you're producing and repurpose it into a series of micro content, and suddenly you have dozens and dozens of pieces that can be shared for you, and Content Multiplied even takes care of that for you. Unlock your content superpower with Content Multiplied and go to contentmultiplied.com today. That's contentmultiplied.com. Thanks, Myla, and let's go into the show. You are listening to Impact Hustlers, and I am your host, Maiko Schaffrath. I have made it my mission to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs to solve some of the world's biggest social and environmental problems. And for this reason, I am speaking to some of the best entrepreneurs out there who are solving problems such as food waste, climate change, poverty, and homelessness. My goal is that Impact Hustlers will inspire you either by starting an impact business yourself, by joining the team of one, or by taking a small step, whatever that may be, towards being part of the solution to the world's biggest problems. In today's episode, I speak to Garth Watson, co-founder of Libryo, a platform helping companies comply with environmental, health, and safety regulations across the world. While large corporates have extensive policies on compliance with environmental, health, and safety regulation, the actual implementation still really remains a challenge for many of them. And this leads to companies breaking the law intentionally or unintentionally, putting the employees of their suppliers at risk, and obviously leading to environmental damage and ultimately exposing companies to reputational and financial risk. Libryo is solving this problem, and I'm really excited to have Garth on the show to talk more about that. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks, Maiko.
Amazing. So first of all, let's start with your personal story. You trained as a lawyer. You started your career in South Africa. Your personal story started there. So tell us more about your background, your life story, and how you turned from lawyer to entrepreneur.
Good question. Okay, so firstly, it probably let's start the story a little bit before I studied. I need to give a shout out to my mom here, I think. My mom is a very passionate environmentalist and responsible for starting things like recycling programs at local schools and that kind of thing. And actually, before I studied law, I studied environmental science, probably because of her influence. And then I studied law and practiced law for about 10 years in Cape Town at a really great South African law firm, Gunston Strandvik. And it was during that period that I, with Grant and Ulrich, the partners then at Gunston's, together with Pete Flynn, who's current co-founder of Libryo, we jointly acquired an environmental law consultancy called the Environmental Law Consultancy. And it was a South African company, and it serviced really great, leading companies, global brands in their South African operations to know what the regulation for them was. And during that period, Pete and I collaborated to develop a software product, which we called the Standards and Legal System. And when I moved to the UK in 2015, I decided that would be the time to say bye-bye to practicing as a lawyer. I decided not to qualify as a solicitor in the UK. And I thought, hey, let's just do some market research. Let's see if there is a need for what we've developed. And it felt like there was a real demand And so we made the call to incorporate Libryo in the UK and get it funded by local VCs in London. And so that's the very short story. It was significant as well that at that time I was introduced to Malcolm, who's my other co-founder, Malcolm Gray, and his background was in asset management, and particularly he headed up Investec Asset Management, it's now called 91. He headed up their ESG stewardship program and policies. And so he was one of the forerunners in the field of ESG. So the three of us set out on the Libryo journey at that point.
Amazing. And we'll dive a bit deeper into your journey also up to the present day in a bit. But before we do that, I'd love to cover a bit more what Libryo actually does, how it actually works. And before we do that, the problem you solve, really. So I've summarized it briefly, but maybe in your own words, what's the problem and what's the size of this problem that you're solving? And then how does Libryo actually do this?
Thanks. So if you're a global company or somebody at a global company and you're trying to make sure that you comply with the law across all of your operations from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, the pain points are significant. The reason being is that law is exceptionally complicated. It's written in complicated words and phrases. It's frequently updated. It's published from multiple sources, sometimes within one jurisdiction, but typically an operation, say a factory or a mine, will be located in a number of locations. So take an American example, federal law will apply, state law will apply, county law will apply, and then city law will apply. Not to mention other regulators that may publish law that's relevant. That's just statutes. Then there's courts. We typically don't deal with courts at the moment. The major need for our customers is statutes and regulation. And so you could get that done by a lawyer, but that's kind of grunt work, real heavy lifting. It's the kind of work that a typical lawyer does not enjoy. It's really legal research, and so often it gets outsourced or given to a junior. So it's either done really expensively and infrequently, or inaccurately, or not at all. And it's the kind of thing that a lot of companies resort to DIY, Google and spreadsheets. And credit to Excel, it's an amazing platform, but it wasn't really designed for legal compliance nor legal research. So that's a vast pain point. We've tried really hard to figure out how big the market is for this. It's a combination of a number of different large markets. Anyone who's trying to figure out what the law requires for the sake of compliance at a specific operational site could be included as part of that market, whether service providers or whether it's done internally. And according to kind of bottom up and top down analyses, this is definitely a market in the tens of billions, and we think it's a latent market too. In other words, if there was a product, people would buy it. So there's no the market is a mashup of different markets plus an accounting for this latent market, and it's very large and hard to put a number to it, but it's definitely in the tens of billions, probably in the hundreds of billions in size, so it's a significant opportunity.
Amazing. And then where you're at today, what's your current state in terms of the traction you have with customers? What kind of companies are using this, and how are they using it?
Thanks. We've invested very, very heavily in our product development and our legal data production. So there's two aspects to Libryo. The product and the modules and the features that it has. So you could think of that as, requirements, getting legal updates. Then we've got an assess module in terms of which you can really drill down on what the law requires of you. People, more than they want to know what the law is, they will actually want to know what must I do. So we've got a self-audit, we call it Libryo Assess module. And and then a whole host of other features which enable compliance. So um, and then the other side of Libryo is legal data production. So company wants to use those features that I mentioned, and they want to use it in Texas, they want to use it in California, then Germany, Italy, and so on and so forth. And so one of the challenges for Libryo has actually been how do we service a customer, even if we've got product market fits, they're right within the sweet spot. How do we actually deliver to them if their need is for multiple jurisdictions across the world? And so we've invested exceptionally heavily in developing the data production capabilities and also rolling out legal data for many countries. Libryo is very capital intensive business in that regard. So we've got coverage of some 84 sovereign states and over 500,000 subnational jurisdictions like counties, cities, states, and the like, provinces, whatever they get called. And so that's significant progress. As far as customers concerned, we've got about 100 customers, many of which are enterprise customers in nature, and we typically serve them at either locally in one jurisdiction or across many jurisdictions. And the way we're growing is by those customers saying, "Hey, you're serving us in these states in America. Could you also do Mexico? Or you're serving us here. Could you also do XYZ foreign jurisdictions? Or hey, you're doing environment, health, and safety. Could you do data protection? Could you do employment law?" And that's the way we're growing.
Got it. And I assume have you built like pretty much the largest unified database of this type of information, or what's already out there as an alternative?
I'm gonna say I don't know because there's probably information that I don't know. But I haven't come across something like Libryo with the same degree of jurisdictional coverage. And there are significant players in the space, the legal publishers. Some of them are international in nature. None of them have the truly global coverage. All of them provide really top quality regulatory and legal information, but it's not designed for anyone to use. It's designed for lawyers to use and legal librarians who are trained in legal research to use. And it's up to them to do the analysis and to figure out what are the applicable legal provisions. Whereas what Libryo does is it enables the provision of what we call Libryo streams, and the Libryo streams contain all and only the relevant regulations that a given customer for a specific operation has subscribed for. So I'd like to say yes, but I don't know.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's everything we know. It seems like that. But let's dive a bit deeper into some practical lessons and advice that people can extract from this episode, especially early stage entrepreneurs being on a similar journey. So obviously, the value of your product, as we just like discussed, is like being quite comprehensive. Having all these different jurisdictions in there, having this one place to go for all your regulatory needs. Now, when you started the company, there's like different approaches to take, right? Like, obviously, as a startup, you can't necessarily afford to have 100% coverage of the globe from day one. But at the same time, your customers are kind of coming to you for that, or at least for something close to that, right? Because I assume like a lot of the customers that have this problem, as you said, they're operating in all kinds of jurisdictions. They're not just in one. If it's just one, it's probably better for them to just like hire a small team for that quickly or something like that. I'm just wondering, how do you actually start a platform like this? Is it quite capital intensive, as you said, or was there like a lean way of developing this product initially when you first started?
Libryo is building a very capital intensive business. We've benefited from many hindsight opportunities. We still haven't quite figured it out. As an early stage company, finding product market fit is hard enough. If you find product market fit, you got kind of, it's yours to lose. I think Library has found product market fit, but what's been a challenge for us is what I think of as product legal data production market fit. So, like you rightly say, if we had all the data from day one, all we'd have to do is figure out product market fit and we're off to the races. But if we had that global data set, that would be a tremendously valuable data set. So it's kind of, it's like a fantasy question to talk about that. So the question is, how do you build a global regulatory database incrementally? And I guess the answer is in my own self-posed question. You do it incrementally. And how we sort to do it is on the back of customer demand. So we got to a point early on where, there was one deal, it was a deal for an international telephone operator, and it was probably the gutsiest deal that we've done. We concluded it, and we rolled out data for the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. We went from two jurisdictions, namely two sovereign states, South Africa and the United Kingdom. I correct myself there because South Africa is 11 provinces and 178 municipalities, and the United Kingdom to the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. And it was cool because it was EHS law for cell phone towers. So not a massive scope in terms of the domain, but a big scope in terms of coverage. And we really just used up all our pre-seed funding just about, but it got us onto a trajectory because it was a big deal. And from there, we've sought to do similar kinds of deals where now you can leverage. We've got typically the thinking is we have this coverage in terms of jurisdictional or domain coverage, domain being the areas of law like environment, health and safety, data protection, so on and so forth. We can roll this out for you pretty much immediately, but we're going to take time to deliver the rest. And most global enterprises have very long sales cycles. And so a 3 to 6 month rollout, some of the time to most of the time, is acceptable. And so we seek to develop the database on the back of customer demand, only though if it's within the areas where we have product market fit. Right, so we're not trying to, we're not just doing consulting. It is still software, but Library is unique in that we're not just SaaS. We're also we're a data company, so it's novel in that regard.
Love it. And then how much did you raise to date in terms of the funding that you needed to pull this off?
We've currently raised £3.9 million.
So far in total throughout the whole journey? In
total, founding to date, capital raised.
Got it. And one thing we talked about before was actually that, especially in the last year, you had quite a rough journey, and I'm always very keen to dive deeper into that to extract lessons learned from that. It seems like you're kind of through the worst at the moment, but talk us through last year, what happened, and some of the lessons that you learned, and that must have been a very difficult year for you.
Thanks. 2021 was super hard. Very, very challenging. We started our 2021 with what then was a good plan, and with the benefit of hindsight, I think was a good plan. So if you take into account the discussion that we've had today so far, what do we need to get onto a hyper-growth revenue trajectory? We need to roll out legal data. We need to be able to roll out legal data really quickly. And we also need to extend our coverage. So it's a combination of having a lot of coverage and also being able to the extent that you don't have the coverage that any given potential customer needs, to say, well, we can deliver this, we can roll it out for you in a short space of time. So we had raised some capital during the pandemic. So during 2020, and 2021 things were opening up, and we thought if we execute on a heavy investment into legal data production, we should be able to support our marketing and sales approaches, and our revenue should reach a certain level, enabling us to raise further capital. And we did that, and we're living in the good of it now. So our legal data production capacities are like really awesome right now. We've developed some really great tooling, including some cool AI stuff, which is really accelerating our legal data rollouts. But the revenue didn't quite follow. And it's not that we didn't grow, we grew really well. We just didn't grow at the rate that we needed in order to successfully raise a Series A. And so we at a critical point, I mean, we were obviously managing runway and managing cash flow really carefully, but we had to make the call like, flip, we can't count on a raise. So what we're going to have to do is keep the business sustainable, continue to manage our obligations to customers, all of whom are current subscribers and many on multi-year deals, and basically not impair the value of the company to a point where we basically just drive the thing off a cliff, which is that's how startups die. All startups die because they run out of money. That's always the reason, right? So we had to cut pretty hard, and it was super painful. We've at Libryo, we've been very deliberate about building a company culture that's full of honor and encouragement, and calling out the greatness in people. And we get called a family. Not that I like that, because you can't sack your family members, right? You're always family. But we had to let go, make 32 people redundant.
Out of how big was the team at the time?
We're in the 60s.
You were 60 people, and then half the team size, basically.
Basically half the team. It was just more than 60, but we and it was hard. And you might detect in my demeanor right now,
of course,
emotion. It's obviously still quite close to the the tier levels are not far below the glands. Probably one of the roughest 4 hours of my life was the 4 hours after we made the announcement to the company, and then I with Michelle, who's one of our captains, who I work closely with. She oversees legal data production. We just spent 4 hours on Zoom calling people and saying either you're staying, congrats, this is how the future's going to look, or so sorry, like, don't know how to say this, but unfortunately you're not going to be with Libryo beyond X date. That sucks. It's just one of those like really sucky things.
Yeah, it's probably the hardest, and I'm lucky to never had to make that type of decision, mainly because I haven't been embarking on this type of ambitious journey that you've been on. I think that's how it starts as well, like putting out such big intentions and actually pulling a lot of, but then, if there is uncertainty in startups, these things are necessary sometimes. So I appreciate you sharing this so openly and honestly. And I just can't imagine the hours before announcing something like this, how terrifying this is, and how much your head must turn in circles in terms of, is there a way to make it work? Is there a way to keep people on somehow, right? But I guess in the end, it comes down to, do we have the money in the bank? Do we have the investors investing? And How was the time just before that announcement? How did you arrive at that decision? Was it relatively clear that you had to make that decision, or were you kind of, how did you go about that process?
What I've learned over the years is that there are a couple of ways, a couple of inputs to decisions, right? You've got spreadsheets and numbers, and then you've got other sources like non-financial data that ultimately translates into financial data. You, and making good decisions is about certainty. It's about taking the quantitative cold hard numbers, and it's about taking the qualitative stuff from all different inputs. So whether it's hope from a sales conversation, or whether you prayed and in your spirit you like believe something, or whatever it is, and it's about bringing all of those things together. And um, in abundance of counselors there's victory. So Pete Malk and I, we often diverge slightly. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but where we've got a way of operating at Libryo where we agree together. And yeah, man, we had to just you can't bury your head in the sand. There have been a couple of defining moments for us as leaders at Libryo over the years. This was definitely one of them. You have to make hard decisions and then implement them in as world class a way as possible with tough mind and soft heart. And so it was all about just doing that. I haven't really to be honest, you're the first person that's asked a question like this, like a retroactive on the thing sometime later. So hopefully that answer is good enough.
Just a really quick break from this episode to let you know a little bit more about our podcast producer and content agency, Content Multiplied. With all the moving pieces of a business, you can't be stuck managing and creating new content all the time. That's why I've started using Myla and her team at Content Multiplied. It's really an all-in-one content management and repurposing solution that can handle all your content needs. Visit them at contentmultiplied.com today. Contentmultiplied.com. Okay, let's get back to the episode. No, it's I think it's useful and insightful, and appreciate that. It does take a while to process that and actually draw the conclusions for the long run as well. I think there's like some real case studies out there, but then in a case by case is always different, right? So there's I don't know if you read it, but like the hard things about hard things from Ben Horowitz, which talks about the difference of a Wartime CEO and the Peacetime CEO. Did you feel like you had to make that transition in your head where you're suddenly from, hey, we're on this rocket ship, everything is amazing, we're growing, to making these tough decisions? Did you feel like you had to switch something in your mind, or did you feel that wasn't the case?
I think there's no such thing as a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO. I think that in running a startup, there's always a blend of both. So it's just a level adjustment. So we just kind of accessed a level of I guess ability to suffer. We dug deep into that and worked with that. And obviously you draw on your reserves kind of in different ways. But I don't think we've ever had like peacetime or wartime. It's always a combination. I think we're always in a war, actually. It's just like, how do you feel during the war?
I love that description. I think it's very much in line with what I've seen with people on the podcast and the entrepreneurs I've worked with. Is some describe it as the roller coaster ride, right? Like in the morning, everything looks great, in the afternoon, everything looks terrible, and then half an hour later, it looks amazing again, and you're just like on this journey constantly, right? Like you can't differentiate. It's like, oh, now the current quarter is all peacetime, great.
There's a thing. Sorry, there's a thing that I read in a cycling magazine, and it was some professional cyclist somewhere, or triathlete or whatever. and their advice was something that they had been told by a coach, and the advice was, no matter how good or bad you feel, it won't last, which is great on a long distance athletic exploit, because if you're feeling great, just enjoy it, because you're gonna, I don't know, you're gonna slam yourself into hypoglycemia or something, or, whatever. But if you're suffering, just pedal through it, because it won't last. And I think it's the same in life, and especially in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. I found a really interesting piece of advice that one of the founders, Tom McGillicuddy, the founder of Ticker, which is a fintech here in, actually they're now called Circa 5000. It's a social impact investment app. And he was on the podcast and he shared some simple but quite powerful advice, I think. As a founder, you're on this journey with loads of highs and loads of lows, constantly navigating that. And if you imagine it as a curve going up and down, literally the roller coaster, as a founder, you kind of need to stay in the middle and not get too excited about the highs, because they're going to go as well at some point. There's going to be tough things, and also not get too attached to the lows in terms of like having this kind of downward spiral in your head of everything is going to crash. You got to be somewhere in the middle. And that's, I guess, the like mentally challenging thing that founders need to do constantly.
No, no, no. It's just, I disagree with that. I've heard it before as well, some sentiment similar to that. But because it's so hard at times, you don't want to mute your highs. You want to express the joy as best you can. You want to feel it to its full. You want to have those moments of peak self-actualization. Like just the other day, I was looking through some of the stuff that our NLP team had done, and it was so sick. I just got so excited. I called Pete, my co-founder, and I said, "Dude, look at this. This is incredible." And we enjoyed that moment to the full. Because if you're going to have the other side of it, you deserve, I think, not deserve, you don't deserve it, but you like, why not experience the joy? But then, yes, during the suffering, you got to use that to your own advantage. So like, you got to be able to suffer well and play with the pain and use it to fuel you, and so on and so forth.
Got it. That's a really good different point of view on that. I love that, and I think it's a good message to myself. Again, I'm not running actually a startup. I'm a solopreneur with focused on impact hustlers, doing some consultancy work and building a bootstrapped company with impact hustlers. But yeah, it's I think it's good advice, and I'm somebody that, for example, almost never celebrates anything. Like, we launched a community of founders this week, and I was like, I tend to go just to the negative in terms of this needs fixing, this needs to improve. And yeah, I think a really good point on celebrating the highs. I think it's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't be kind of this cold-hearted person.
For stuff like that, you should always have a bottle of champagne in the fridge. You should always have that. So not for everything. You can't be like popping the cork every week. But for things like starting a new community and anything that's significant, I mean, life's too short, eh?
I don't drink anything anymore, but I will have some non-alcoholic bubbly in the fridge from now on. I'll take that advice from you. So good, really good point.
You can get some really good, what's it called? That tea stuff.
Sparkling tea is actually really nice, really nice.
Kombucha. You can get really good champagne like kombucha. Yeah.
Got it. That's the key advice. Key takeaway from this episode: get some sparkling kombucha to celebrate. I want to cover one more thing about this difficult period last year, and then obviously look a bit into the future and kind of the great things ahead for you as well, rather than just dwelling on the past. But I think one specific thing that I'm keen to understand is, one thing is being faced with these difficult decisions of having to let go of employees, having to let go half your team. But then the other one is how you actually communicate and handle it. And there's been a case recently in the US. I forgot the name of the company, but of a CEO basically kind of sending out an email, sorry, you're all fired and pack your stuff pretty much. And then there was like one Zoom meeting for the whole company saying, look, you'll basically half of you are fired. Which is obviously not the way to go, right? Like, or like this, there's this like George Clooney, what is it, Up in the Air movie where you hire like these consultants to fire your employees rather than doing it yourself. Obviously, there's loads of bad practice out there in terms of how to do this, especially with your employees, their livelihood depending on it. You may not be able to pay them loads of severance over loads, so how do you handle this in the best possible way in terms of communication to your employees, and what you can still do if people that listen to this are in a situation like this or will be? What advice do you have for them on that?
I don't feel like I have advice, but I can say a few things that I think, which is you do it the way you'd want it to be done to you. So these processes exist in order to keep the ship afloat in a storm. It would be lovely to say we're going to pay you out for a year. You're guaranteed a great job somewhere else. Find yourself while, use this opportunity to your advantage. So sorry, insert company name. But that's not the point. The point is to be able to cut costs quickly so that the company can carry on. So it's about providing the amount of severance pay that's due to everyone. And if you can't do that, you've left it too late, really. So that's where the spreadsheets come in. But in terms of the fact that you're dealing with often people that are good friends, because it's a fiction to think that friends are outside of business. You might hire a total stranger, but after a while you become friends with them. They become dear to you. And there are people that we said goodbye to who, if I think too hard about it, I will start crying. I still can't believe that so and so and so and so is not working at Libryo, right? So it's not a difficult question. It's like, if you care about people, like, how do you have the conversation? What's the kindest way to do it? And I remember that recent retrenchment, because the All In pod talked about it and
Yeah, that's
actually
it.
played the clip.
Yeah.
I just can't remember the name, but man, that is not the way to do it. And so the way we did it was we had an all company meeting. It sucked because it was on Zoom, but we're a remote first company, so it had to be. And with employees around the world, and what we did was we wrote a letter explaining everything, some of the stuff that I've explained in the call, how the company got to the point, why we have to do it, and we split it up, and we basically we read it out, but tried to make it like we weren't reading it, if you know what I mean. Like, this is a company announcement. And then immediately after that, I called Michelle, and we together had conversations with all of my team. So it was 4 hours worth. Well, not my team, but those in the legal data production, ontology development, and so on and so forth. That side of the business. And you just got to be yourself. And that's when, it's times like that where who you are is revealed. So if you have got poor character, that's when the poor character comes out. And if and vice and on the upside as well. Like, it's a time where character is revealed, I think.
Absolutely, and I think there was a case in that, and we both watched the same episode. I just had a look again. It's a company called Better.com, which is a mortgage broker, I think, or like a mortgage platform. I'm not quite sure about their business in detail, but I think it was like about 700 or 900 employees being fired over Zoom, and I think the CEO was put on leave after that, obviously, obviously, I mean, by the board. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing your insights on that. I want to leave on a high note and cover a bit more on what's going on right now. I think it seems like you've been through the worst now. You're like building up again now, early 2022 as we're recording this. What's going on for Libryo right now, and how do you see the next years evolve in terms of the product and the space, and how you'll develop things? Give us a bit of a forward look.
I'll start with the forward-looking thing. I mean, in the future, this database will be built out. So we'll have that scenario, that fantasy scenario when that you described at the start of the call and at the start of the podcast. And there, it's not just environment, health, and safety, but it's all legal domains. Initially, the ones that could be filed under ESG, environment, social, and corporate governance. So, we're looking at anti-bribery and corruption, anti-modern slavery, data protection, supply chain stuff. And there's so many awesome megatrends that are currently underway. The one is that non-financial reporting is really, there's a real movement towards companies voluntarily disclosing non-financial data, as well as a regulatory move, significantly so by the EU, to require the disclosure of non-financial information. So information relating to environment, health and safety, human rights, and not just in your company, but in your supply chain. So looking forward, like the corporate sustainability disclosure requirements, the FSDR, financial sustainability reporting directive, the taxonomy regs, all of these things are going to be coming online in the next few years in a material way. And so Libryo was actually, we didn't foresee these things coming online, but we've been looking at the evolution of non-financial reporting over the years, and it's all coming together in the regulatory space. So Libryo was born for this. So in the future, that's what lies ahead for us. Is our purpose is ensuring everyone knows what to do for a just and sustainable world. So both on the compliance side, but also on the advocacy and compulsion side, both are important. And so that's the future we're looking forward to. That brings obviously opportunities for us. From here, we've got I think a year or two of basically, we're not raising fresh capital from outside investors at the moment. And for me, that's exciting. It's like, let's operate this company profitably. Let's show the operating leverage we have, show what the margins actually look like, because it's very hard to look at margins, especially when you have so many different data assets, each jurisdiction being a data asset. So we're really excited about being able to prove out like the cash return on capex and that kind of stuff, and we'll have that opportunity over the next period. So super pumped about that. And yes, we're in a rebuilding phase, but also just trying to. It's not like everything was bashed down. Like we lost great teammates, but now it's a case of leveraging the technology that we've developed in order to support a smaller team. So yeah, exciting times in many ways, but also difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that obviously there's a lot of development in the space of climate as well, climate regulation. do you find there will be much more need for a solution like this for companies to actually navigate that space? I've spoken to a founder of a company called Climate Policy Radar, which is not quite about compliance, but more about exploring policies across the globe. But it becomes very complex very quickly, right? Is that some opportunity that you see right now that you're working on now?
Absolutely. So compliance has often got a negative view because it's like do no bad as opposed to like do good. But really, what society's doing at the moment is they're deciding on behalf of everyone who's not doing enough to do sufficient, do enough to to overcome the challenges of climate change. And leading the charge there, in many ways, is the EU, with the taxonomy regs and I've mentioned just now FSDR, and it's come into force already in regard to climate businesses that are involved with objectives of climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. And part of that is you've got to do those things, but then you've also got to like do no significant harm to any of the other objectives like biodiversity and transition to circular economy and marine protection and that kind of thing, and others. Then and then you've also got to comply with a whole host of regulations that are incorporated by reference into that. And then there's probably the most detailed set of regulations, the technical screening requirements that are also part of that, which read like technical standards of very, very particular regulations. And so companies are going to have to assess their compliance against that. And funds, the financial services sector is going to have to make sure that the companies that they invest in are within the taxonomy, right? They fall within the definition of a green investment. And so my question is, how do you do it without a product like Libryo? Because the current data providers don't have that level of information. It's actually compliance information. So yes, like there's in the climate space and in the wider sustainability space, compliance information is seriously important.
Amazing. A big role to play for you. A very brief answer for the next one, for the last question, is quick summary, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. How does the world look like in 10 years if Libryo succeeds? How do you imagine it to look like?
Everyone knows what to do for a just and sustainable world.
Love that vision. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing so openly on this true roller coaster ride, and can't wait to see what else you'll be working on, what we'll be launching, be part of like really important change that's happening. Garth, really appreciate your time and your openness and sharing your lessons learned. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Maiko. It's been great. Thanks very much.